Okay, we are live today. Well, welcome everybody to our, I think it's our 8th or 9th meetup. I lost count now in terms of a chatbot one. During the last year, we run them quite frequently. This is all thanks to our group of organizers. Today we have a very packed schedule, very interesting one. We have two presentations. We'll start with presentation by Luke Campen about enterprise virtual agents from the trenches, so real life experience sharing. Then we'll have a presentation from Mark Drass from Macquarie University about the state of the art in natural language understanding from a researcher angle. And then towards the end of our session, we'll have a panel discussion with Dennis, Peter, and Dominic about the real life experience in the chatbots. First of all, I'd like to share a few things as I usually do. There are 3 pillars in our meetup that we adhere to. The first one is openness. So we openly talk about the challenges we have and the problems we have and discussing them. We all willing here to share, and I ask everybody, if you think you have something to share, maybe do a presentation next time or participate in the panel discussion, please reach out to our organizer team and we will be happy to get you on stage and have a proper discussion. And this is meetup built by practitioners and for practitioners. So we really don't solve any marketing goals here. All our goal here is to share our experience and to learn together, because the field of the chatbots is still very early stage, and unless we learn from each other, we won't be able to go quickly. There is probably not a book where you can go and read about how to do chatbots perfectly. And if there is any book, it will be already kind of too outdated, because the technology changing very, very quickly. And I want to acknowledge our amazing team of organizers for the ideas and support. Bora, Dennis, and Peter, you guys really amazing, and you breathed the new life into this event, and we can see that we have more and more people joining us, and that's really, really great. And I want to thank EPAM to support our initiatives with meetups across APAC region, and the most importantly, every member of our community for investing the time to be with us. It's 2-3 hours of your time, and I hope you will enjoy our session. With this, Dennis, stage is yours to moderate.
Awesome.
This meetup. Thank
you. So I guess this meetup today for chatbots has been arranged all around the deep dives, in particular deep dives for natural language processing. We had some feedback from some people saying, oh, look, the business side is great, use cases are great, but we actually like to also dive into some of the detail about the how-tos and sort of
presentation.
And that's what's...
This is a little bit about who we are and some of our links. I'm going to stop sharing, so we'll copy some of that information.
We need to mute.
Yes.
Sorry, I'll get myself back.
Might have to mute that one, Pavel.
Here we are.
I'm trying to find, there are many people now.
Links that are important to this.
It's Henry 88 something too.
I think we mentioned last time,
Okay.
if you
Okay.
sign up for our
mute all and then unmute me.
So
yeah, I'm trying to find how to mute all. Okay, it's all right. Okay, let me get you guys co-organizers so we can mute.
I'll let you organize that while I talk for a bit. And today's sessions are all geared around natural language processing, and 2 hours can never really do the whole topic justice, but hopefully it dives a little bit deeper. Do let us know in the feedback whether you want more information or more niche discussions around NLP, maybe NLP for specific use cases or topics. Do let us know. First up, we have Luke from Accenture. Luke Kempen is a manager of Accenture's Applied Intelligence team. He leads organizations and teams to reinvent their customer experience using virtual agents, NLP, and machine learning solutions. Luke has been delivering these solutions in enterprise for the last 5 years across a range of industries, including financial services, resources, utilities, government, and healthcare. Luke has worked in just about every role in a virtual agent team, starting as an NLU trainer and moving into conversational design, conversational development, and more. Luke now works as delivery and technical lead, and I'm sure we can learn a lot from him. Over to Luke.
Can I pop one little thing as Luke starts? If anyone comes up with any questions for Luke through the presentation, feel free to drop them in chat and I'll try to collect them up.
Hi everyone. Screen test first. Is everyone able to see me on a glorious snowy mountain?
Bragging.
Is that Mount Fuji?
People have asked me that a couple of times. It remarkably looks like Mount Fuji. It's Mount Yorte, which is the Mount Fuji of the north. So that's in Hokkaido. So this is Niseko. I was there a couple of years back. And yeah, often you can't actually see the mountain because there's so much clouds and the visibility is low. But on the very rare day, it looks like this and it's absolutely unbelievable.
Stunning.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to reminisce about, being able to fly somewhere and do some activity more than an hour each day. I'm coming to you live from Melbourne. I think a lot of you are Sydney based, but we're very, very jealous of everyone in the rest of Australia able to get out and do a little bit more. But we're going to get there and we'll be joining you guys soon. A little bit about me to add to what Dennis introduced. I was born in Melbourne. I studied engineering at university, and out of school, I got a job with IBM and I moved to Canberra. And I was there for a few years before joining Accenture, and I've been with Accenture now for a couple of years. And for all of that time, I've largely been delivering virtual agents and intelligent enterprise search systems to a whole range of clients. And as Dennis said, my first role was as an NLU trainer, and I'll be leaning on a bit of that experience today and tell you a bit about all of the challenges and pitfalls and some of the things that I've experienced going through all of that. Probably I should mention that I do go for Hawthorn in the AFL, and I'm struggling at the moment because we're doing pretty badly. So I'm hoping 2020 will end not just because of COVID, but also because Hawthorn are having a terrible year and we can do better next year. All right, I'm going to dive right in. One of the first things I want to know when I start a new project is, where are we going? And this doesn't really relate to natural language understanding, but it's quite important to me. Where are we going? Why are we doing this? And where do we want to get to? And all of this relates to, does the organization have a virtual agent strategy? I think it is the single most important thing when it comes to the success of a virtual agent project. And I think that the virtual agent strategy is even more important than the virtual agent architecture. Your architecture, gives you your blueprint for development, but your strategy is your blueprint for everything else. What channels you're going to target, what use cases you're going to go for, what capabilities you're going to have and when. And how is your strategy going to support existing strategies like digital strategy or customer service strategy? And it also covers the way that an organization will structure themselves. And I go in and I look around and I ask this question to myself: is the organization clearly aligned on virtual agent strategy, ownership, and operating model? A few years back, I was working on a very large virtual agent project. They were ready and very clear on what their minimum viable product virtual agent would look like. They had extremely good product ownership and an intelligent team, but their wider strategy was unclear. And there was even competition internally between teams. Other parts of the business were building virtual agents and doing proof of concepts, and none of these teams were communicating with each other. In fact, they were competing against each other for ownership of, cool new tech, so to speak. And some of these, in that particular role, they focused on kind of one aspect of their strategy, and it was around the operating model, and it got a huge amount of attention. They could tell me the job description for the people that they were going to hire, and what their career path would be. So they would bring on someone to work as a conversation analyst, and then they would then get promoted to be a conversation designer, and so on. All of this was happening while I was delivering the virtual agent and had no one to hand over to or to teach. And so the best intentions with the virtual agent strategy mean nothing if you don't actually stick to it and implement that. And I'll probably talk a bit more later on about some of the difficulties I had, with knowledge transfer and handing over. Virtual agents AI, so it's magic, right? I think we're getting better, but certainly a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the belief was that these things are incredibly intelligent and they work straight away. And I have some salespeople to blame for that, maybe. Hope there aren't too many people on the call here. But yeah, one of the biggest pitfalls that I've encountered is the unrealistic expectations. I think we've all heard of solutions that say you can build a chatbot in 5 minutes. And that is true. You can build a really, really bad chatbot in 5 minutes, but to create a good one takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of skill. It's not going to be perfect, and it's not magic. And I try and set these expectations really early on, specifically around NLU performance. And the 3 things that I focus on are garbage in equals garbage out. So if you put crap data into training your natural language understanding model, you're going to get crap results. So garbage in is going to give you garbage out. The second one is that you should always aim for the gold standard in question or example collection to train your NLU model. And I say aim for because it's not always possible. The gold standard of questioning or examples is real end user interactions. And usually that's in a production setting. But you may not have a production instance of a chat system to collect that. So you might have to get a bit creative. And lastly, teach frequently, test often, and continuously learn. And by really living by this process, you can help to overcome some of those unrealistic expectations about how NLU should perform, and also educate the people that you're working with along the way. One of my, actually my very first virtual agent project, this is going on 5 years ago now, we were building a virtual agent to help people with disability to get the help and information that they needed. And this was particularly challenging because there were no concrete processes. It was all in flux. The website was very poor, content almost non-existent. And of course, there were no examples or questions that you could, they didn't have any data to train that natural language understanding model. And some of you who have been in this position might know what's coming next and can probably appreciate the pain that I went through. That gold standard of question or examples to train the model doesn't exist. You want to target the right users about the right topic and in the right situation, but we had none of that. So to overcome that, we targeted lots of sources. So we looked at what people were asking on social media, what people asked at webinars. We conducted interviews. We looked at email inboxes and a whole lot more. And of course, lots of user testing. And because we were collecting examples from a wide range of sources, we needed to do a lot of cleansing of our training set. So we didn't just collect an example and then throw it into the NLU. We removed the extraneous words and phrases, like when people tell a life story or say, hi, how are you? And then their question, all that sort of stuff. Really clean the question to get the best results possible. So inevitably, clients I work with always ask what NLU, natural language understanding, performance or say accuracy is the level we want to meet before we can go live. And I always say no virtual agent is the same. You can't compare them in terms of NLU performance. And I try to never commit to a number. Instead, I try and stress what I like to call learning progress. So really hitting on that third point there, to teach frequently, test often, and continuously learn, demonstrate that your natural language understanding model is getting better and better with time. And so to do this, we would create weekly reports that gave updates on the question and example collection we were doing, the number of intents that we were training, how many examples they had assigned to them, the user testing that we had done, and statistical analysis. So doing things like k-fold cross-validation and reporting on precision and recall and F1 score for those of you who might be familiar with that. And the client really appreciated the transparency that we gave and acknowledged that it's never going to be perfect. Performance may even degrade, with a new test. But if the overall trend is upwards and improving, that was the goal. So I think I spent, months on that project, and I kind of lived in training that NLU model because it was quite a complex one. And I spent so much time working on it that I actually started dreaming about the intents and examples, and would have breakthroughs about how to reduce confusion. And the next day I'd be talking to myself thinking, was that real life or was that a dream? I had a breakthrough and I now can't remember whether it was reality or not. Get the good data and test frequently, teach frequently, test often, and continuously learn are kind of the three main takeaways there. But it would be remiss of me to say that, NLU is everything. Like, you can't, train an NLU in isolation for a virtual agent. Everything at the end of the day comes back to the user experience. The image I'm showing here is, I believe, from trains in Sydney. Maybe some of you know and have seen it. These stickers are there to promote social distancing. So looks cool, clean, but thinking about how users would actually interact with this, you might start to notice a problem. And if all the passengers were to stand on those green circles or sit on those green circles, they'd all be obscured. And so new passengers would not be aware of their existence. And so they might sit next to a passenger and not observe social distancing. So if they had done a bit more user testing, they might have thought of having stickers that said, don't sit here, because then it would always be visible to new passengers who came on. Maybe someone can tell me a bit later if these are still on the Sydney trains or if they've changed them at all. But virtual agents really are no different. It's all about, user experience, and user testing is the best way to build and deliver the best user experience. And I suppose an example of how this can impact your natural language understanding is, think of a customer service use case where the customer might say, "Can you help me pay my bill?" And the NLU is trained to understand this phrase as payment assistance, like a payment extension. The customer wants an extension on their bill. So they've said, "Can you help me pay my bill?" So it understands the intent is payment assistance, and it helps them do their payment extension. And so, according to your training data and everything, your VA is behaving as it should. It gets full marks. Absolutely nothing wrong there. However, when you do some user testing, you might notice things go differently. And you have a user say, "Can you help me pay my bill?" But instead, they mean, "Can you help me make a payment?" They don't need an extension. They just want to pay their bill. So what do you do? And there are a few options that you could go with. One would be you could clarify what the user means every time. We call this disambiguation. So you could ask, did you want a payment extension or help to make, or did you want to make a payment? And to do this, you could leave your intents as they are, or you might merge them, and then you change your conversation flows to handle that. Another option could be you choose to clarify the user's input when the confidence is of a mid-range. So the NLU outputs a confidence level, and this level for a particular input is of the mid-range, and so you ask for clarification. And the third option could be you add another intent, and for all the ambiguous ones, where you're not sure whether they want a payment extension or to make a payment. There's no clear and obvious choice about which option is going to give the best results. And that's where user testing is key. You can test a few scenarios like this with your users and see what works the best, and then go ahead and implement that. All of this, I want to stress, means that there's lots of collaboration between your virtual agent team. So your NLU trainer is not working in isolation. They work very closely with conversation designers and conversation developers to ensure that your intent structure matches up with providing the best possible user experience. And recently, actually, we've been doing virtual agent reviews. So we're looking at virtual agents that are in production, and organizations they're not quite reaching the performance that they want. And so we come in and we help review what's going on and suggest ways that they can improve and meet the benefits that they want from their virtual agent. And one recent example, our client had, for all intents and purposes, had forgotten about the customer. And they had built their virtual agent, deployed it, they were live, and they were adding new use cases and new content. And not once did they ever test with real users. And to make things even worse, they had a continuous improvement team that was operating, every week, but their focus was on NLU performance. So whilst they had a very highly tuned natural language understanding engine, for their training data, it didn't lead to good outcomes for customers. So it was going back to that example earlier where the virtual agent seems correct, but actually the experience is bad. So by only taking that view of focusing on natural language understanding, you kind of miss the bigger picture. And so this team was reporting great results, accuracy was above 80%, but it was hiding the true story. And the true story was that customers didn't like it and the experience was bad. And so this led to a lack of trust with the virtual agent. And once that trust was lost, the human nature, I guess, was to blame the technology. And there was nothing wrong with the technology. It was just how the technology was being applied that wasn't working. And this feeds in a lot to how organizations are going to, measure success. And because they focused on NLU performance, they sort of missed the mark with how success should be measured. But I'll probably digress on that one because that's quite a big topic for another time. It takes a village to raise a virtual agent. I've stolen this from an African proverb. So it takes a village to raise a child, but often we use that analogy that a virtual agent is like a child or a toddler. Initially, it's not very intelligent, but with a bit of TLC and effort, it becomes more and more intelligent to the point where it can become one of your best customer service agents. But I've been in situations where the village crumbles just before go live, so to speak, where the implementation team leaves and there's not adequate handover to progress and maintain the virtual agent in production. So a couple of years ago actually, the project I was working on, I had no one to hand over to, except one person who was temporary. And naturally I had said, this is not very good. This won't result in a good outcome for the project. And I stress that virtual agent build and maintenance is tacit knowledge. And tacit knowledge means that it's not something that can be easily written down or verbalized. But with no other option, I had to try and write it down. And so to do that, I wrote like a conversation design and maintenance document. It was more than 100 pages detailing processes, worked examples, basically trying to translate my thoughts onto paper. And that's why it had to be so long. But of course, for all the best efforts, it didn't work. So as much as possible, try and avoid these situations where you rely on documentation to teach someone how to train and update a virtual agent. Having done this for quite a while, I actually have more examples of this. More recently, to continue a story from earlier, the organization who had very little strategy, the same signs were happening. They didn't have the right people in place to transition from implementation to maintenance. And I had made a lot of noise about it, but didn't get the outcome we wanted. So instead, I ran a 2-day boot camp or workshop. And this time doing hands-on activities to really try and not just write down the thought process, but teach it. But 2 days is not a lot of time, and it resulted in information overload, basically. One of the participants actually had a little bit of a breakdown, had to take a break, and the remaining participants, when surveyed, would you feel comfortable operating in this role? They all said no. So it really stresses that nothing replaces the hands-on learning and experience. And to highlight, another example of where things can go right, there was a project and there were sort of two cohorts. There were the people who had been there for the implementation and had done extensive shadowing, basically sitting side by side with the experts to learn how to train and optimize NLU, how to deliver great customer experiences. And then there was another cohort who were brought on to expand the team size, and they got knowledge transfer, like a workshop for a few days. And you could see quite clearly when we spoke to them later on that the team that had the hands-on shadowing experience dramatically outperformed the team that only had the knowledge transfer. And it really highlights that it is tacit knowledge and you kind of have to live it to learn it. And finally, traditional roles might not always be the best fit I've seen. It might seem natural to get a data scientist to be your natural language understanding trainer, or to get a business analyst to be a conversation designer. But it's not as easy as repurposing job titles for a virtual agent team. The types of skills that, and it's hard because these skills barely exist in the market. It's hard to get the right people to form part of your team. But what I look for is people who are fast learners and have curiosity. They always want to learn more. And importantly, they're comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, because especially with natural language understanding, you might make a change that you have no idea how it's going to impact your model. So you have to be comfortable with uncertainty. And so those are the sorts of people that I tend to look for when building out a team or with my clients. The last thing I want to say, I guess, is in the trenches, we battle enormous expectations of AI and machine learning and virtual agents. And I've had people say to me, oh, why doesn't it learn by itself? It should get this right. Why do we have to train it? It's AI, it should work. Why do we have to write out every response? It should answer perfectly and also have zero brand risk every time. And I always have to reset those expectations. By nature of machine learning and statistical systems, virtual agents are not perfect. Virtual agents are not magic. And virtual agents have far more logic and rules in them than people think. And it's going to take a lot of time and effort to maintain them, but it can absolutely be worth it. So I wanted to combine all of this sentiment with an inspirational quote to finish on. So I thought I'd enlist the help of machine learning to come up with an inspirational quote for me So you can go to InspiroBot and get all the inspirational quotes to your heart's desire. So everybody sell out greatness and examine shrimps. So that's all I had.
Nice one.
That's great. Sell out. Greatness. Thank you, Luke, for that very insightful talk. Lots of questions, sort of, and comments flying around in the chat group. I might start with a question first, actually, and having worked at transport previously and seeing those images of the dots you have, it's quite an interesting point, because I can imagine, not that I was there for the discussions, but that there are schools of thoughts from the UX land that say, you shouldn't use colors that are red and jarring and negative and big crosses. No, it's not quite the right experience. But also there's that, I forget the term, I think it's called ironic process theory. It's like, don't think of a pink elephant. And, if we try and not think about a pink elephant and saying, don't think of a pink elephant, then you will invariably think of one. So don't sit here. People have to think about sitting there first. And so from a psychology standpoint and UX standpoint, maybe don't sit here signs actually mean that you should sit there. People end up sitting there by accident. And so I just think that raises a really good point around chatbots, that it's not really an exact science, and even the NLU space that you point out, it's really much an art in that way on testing what works and what doesn't work as well. But my question I had, where you talked about NLU, having your NLU designers, sorry, NLU workers work closely with designers. I guess, do you ever see cases where you have them being the same person? So an analyst doing the NLU improvements as well as someone who does the conversational design, 2 in 1. Do you ever come across those kinds of resources, and would that help solve some of those problems?
Yeah, certainly. I've worked on a lot of proof of concepts where I've played many of the roles myself. But for, I guess, larger implementations, ideally you'd have distinct roles. And I think that's important because it's easier to have a singular, for an individual to have a singular focus, but be part of a team where they can work together to, get that synergy between NLU design and build. And I think it really helps to play off other people. So if it's one person doing everything, I think maybe Peter said it before earlier, if it's one person designing, building and training it all, and hopefully not the only person testing it, you're going to get a virtual agent that works for one person and one person only.
That's a really good point. Thank you for that. We had a question from Wasim asking about the topic of, more data. And I guess the school of thought that more data is better from a training standpoint, especially if it's clean data. Do you have any comments in terms of how much data you need to build an intent and to make it work well?
Yeah, great question. I try and avoid committing to numbers as a hard and fast rule. But in general, you're going to want more than a handful of examples for an intent. But it's not necessary to go completely overboard. So having hundreds and hundreds of examples for an intent may not be necessary. And certainly different natural language processing systems and services behave differently. So you should be working on tuning it towards the NLP service that you're using, because they don't all behave the same. But probably the key point I'd like to make is your training data should roughly match the frequency distribution of the intents that customers are actually asking the real system. So if you've got an intent that gets asked heaps and heaps, it's more natural to have more examples for that one. And that will, I guess, weight it a little bit higher. But yeah, I would say have a good number, but not too many. I know that's not very useful, but.
We actually on a previous session had someone from UTS give an example, I think, and Nicola talked about an example where they'd overtrained their chatbot on a particular topic, and I think it was counseling services for a university. And if I recall correctly, and I may be wrong in this, but along the lines of if someone had asked something to the chatbot saying, "I'm hungry," counseling services were recommended in indicating that there's overtraining or overweight in that area. And I think your point you make about the NLU tool that you're using or the platform you're using is a really pertinent point, because to Asim's question, some platforms that are heavily machine learning driven, I've heard that they prefer to have an even distribution across all intents or all topics, evenly trained. Otherwise, they have an imbalance issue. But I prefer to follow your school of thought, Luke, in that it should be really weighted based on the types of questions that people also ask your system. So if you've got a long tail and you've got sparse data, that's not the end of the world. You know, hopefully it represents the type of questions that people will ask, and you'll have more data for the questions people ask regularly, and then it's very robust as a result of that.
Can I comment on this, Dennis?
On what, sorry?
Can I just comment on this?
Yeah, sure. Of the question? Yeah, anyone can jump in.
So from our experience with Lewis, we use Lewis extensively. Having overtraining of one intent over another will definitely lead to the bias that you refer to. So we tried this approach and saying, yeah, it's 80-20 rule. This kind of intent is the most common, but it didn't work at all. So we had to keep it more or less balanced in terms of the number of utterances per intent. And from our experience, 20 to 30 were okay. One of the learnings for us was to train the no intent, equally important. So quite often, if you don't do that, it can confuse the model. So there is no conversation that you can capture every single intent. Some of them is out of scope. So you just need to put it as a no intent and give examples of that. So that's our learning, at least from Lewis.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've heard similar stories for the Microsoft platform as well as the Salesforce platform, in that the data imbalance from a machine learning perspective actually makes it challenging. From the work that I do, we often hear and see stories of people playing whack-a-mole. So you imagine you've got 10 different intents and you've hopefully trained them evenly, but one of them's not performing well. So yeah, okay, let's add a few more training utterances to that topic one. And then all of a sudden the performance skews, and you do regression testing, automated testing that was raised earlier, and then something else breaks. And so you're perpetually playing whack-a-mole with pouring more data in, pouring data out. And then it's, you know, with 30 samples, it's not a huge number. It's not a small number either, but it can get challenging in that regards, which is why it's a bit of a science and an art at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. We've still got 5 minutes to go, and there's a few other questions that are coming through. Kalita has asked around skills, around the ranking of subject matter experts versus technical ranking. Luke, have you got any comments around, from an NLP perspective, whether SMEs rank higher or lower versus technical skills?
I'm not sure I understand the question completely. Is it, what are the skills that you most might want to go for an expert, or what roles would you might like to get an expert for? Is that the question?
I think I'll read it verbatim, but in terms of skills, how would you rank subject matter expertise with technical expertise? So I imagine it's unless Sankela wants to come off mute, I imagine it's a ranking of what skills are more important to do NLP work more accurately. Is it someone who's subject matter expert on a domain, or is it someone with technical expertise?
Ideally, it's a combination of both. I think it depends on the person about which one is harder to learn. So you might have a subject matter expert who knows the content and what customers actually mean. And that's going to really help you to assign your intents and everything like that. But that person may not have the skills to do the technical components around statistical analysis and improvement and stuff like that. So I think the right approach is probably to make sure you've got both of those skills and rely on more than one person.
That's a really good point. On that whole team, it takes a village to raise a virtual assistant. I do at times also suggest that you know, if you're short on resources, you have to reuse. I think technical business analysts have that analytical mindset to dive into some data, as well as they understand the business to a certain degree. So that might answer your question there. Another question from Leah Owen about testing conversational design, and this might be more of a generic question, which we can ask again to the panelists. But she proposed the idea of testing to smaller groups of customers to help validate the conversation, or before you go for large volumes within the business. What's your approach to doing that, Luke, in terms of validating designs and NLP?
Sure. I think let's assume that you've done your statistical analysis on your NLU models. You've designed your processes in line with the business processes. It's really just about doing as much testing as possible with users. And the earlier you can do that, the better. So way before go live, during if you're doing a sprint where you tackle a particular use case or intent in one sprint, try and fit user testing in that so that you have that feedback loop, because there's no point doing user testing if you don't actually feed that back into update your design, your intents, and your NLU. So yeah, do it early, do it often, is the best advice that I can give.
Totally agree. We've probably got a minute left before we'll skip over to Mark. There was a question here from Sasha, whether you have any tips around managing multiple users updating and training phrases. Is there a framework or a guideline of sorts to align to? What do you recommend in that instance?
Yeah, this has been a bugbear of mine and a lot of people for a long time. Some of the NLP services and platforms don't have a good interface for managing and updating content. Some do. Some work well with groups of people. But certainly in the early days, we used to rely a lot on spreadsheets. And people hate that because they think, oh, it's AI, it should be smart and intelligent. But spreadsheets do a job. But the problem with the spreadsheet is that at least before Office 365, it was hard to have multiple people working on the same one. Good news is that now that you can have multiple people working on the same one, it kind of alleviates a bit of that stress, but it raises questions for production instances and stuff like that. So certainly in the early stages, I like to use a spreadsheet just because of speed. But in a production instance, I'd be looking to take a slow approach to changing things within the platform or the service.
Really good tips in that instance. And I guess the final point, Sasha, is naming conventions do help. So if you're building NLP and have questions and they're tied to answers, having a naming convention of sorts that is known by all helps you circumvent any overlap and I guess causes of intent clashes in the future as well. We're just out of time. Thank you very much, Luke, for all those insights and lessons learned. A lot of battle scars I can hear out of that. We've got a quick quiz or a poll there. If you haven't already voted, if you could please vote, and we'll share the info out a little bit later. On to the next talk then by Mark Drass from Macquarie University. I actually, full disclosure, I used to study under Mark Drass. So he is credited with teaching me a lot of what I knew in the early days around natural language processing and NLU as well. Mark Drass is an associate professor of the Department of Computing at Macquarie University. He works on machine learning, artificial intelligence, and data science with a particular focus on application to human language, NLP. Tasks that he has worked on recently include native language identification and other author profiling, along with associated privacy issues and the intersection of NLP with image processing, such as image captioning. So Mark, over to you then for the next half of the talk.
Thanks,
Guys,
Dennis.
just yeah, sorry, Mark. Before that, I just want to share the results of this poll. Actually, they are, yeah, very surprised. I was quite sure it should be technology because technology is immature, but as you can see, guys, okay, let me share. So if you can see now that actually the biggest impediment is a strategy, and then skilled people, and technology is the least concern among our members. Wow, wow.
Luke's very first point hit the nail on the head. You know, where are you going with this? The strategy, very, very pertinent.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks. Sorry, Mark. Yep.
Yep, no worries. Right, thanks for the introduction, Dennis. I'd just like to start by saying, yes, Dennis was a very good student. So I'm pleased to see he's doing this interesting stuff now. I will just share my screen. Yeah, so maybe I'll start with a little bit of extra stuff about myself. So I started working in NLP when it was in the early days in Australia. Microsoft decided that they would set up a research institute in Australia, and they're interested in supporting people doing PhDs on that. And because previously there hadn't been any real work on that. So I did my PhD there and at Macquarie. Then I went to University of Pennsylvania, which was kind of a center of NLP work after that. And then I came back to Macquarie because Macquarie at the time was still the main place that was doing NLP in Australia. So I was asked if I'd talk about the research side of things and the state of the art. So I was thinking that I decided I'd structure my talk to illustrate what's happening with NLP and chatbots with one particular system called BlenderBot. So that's brought out by Facebook. A reason, or multiple reasons that I decided to focus on that one, even though it's obviously not the only kind of system that's out there doing really interesting, cutting edge kind of stuff. Organizations like Facebook, Google, and Microsoft all do a lot of really great research and appear in all of the major conferences. So it's good quality research that they do. The BlenderBot was actually just released and open sourced earlier this year. So it's quite new and it's available for people to play with. And I'll show you a bit of that during the talk. Within NLP, there's been a number of different strands of work. So there have been task-oriented agents, just pure chatbots, systems like Siri and Alexa and so on that do some kind of chat, but also answering questions and carrying out some functions. And as the name BlenderBot suggests, that actually is trying to bring together a number of these strands. So it's kind of an interesting illustration. So in order to explain all of how that works and kind of what's interesting about it, I'm going to go through some NLP preliminaries first. So this is the kind of stuff that on machine learning and NLP that I normally spend an entire semester talking about. So I'm compressing that down quite a lot. Yep, of course, if anybody has any questions about anything later, then feel free to stick questions in the chat and I'm happy to talk about it, expand on it later. But to start with as a kind of motivation, so many of you probably will be aware of or have come across these two bots, which were quite prominent, certainly in the media. So both from Microsoft. There's Xiaoice, which is the one that's still exists in China, and Tay. So Xiaoice came out in 2014 with a lot of fanfare, like, oh, it's our AI-powered chatbot. You can chat with Xiaoice and just have lots of interesting interactions. That was pretty successful, and I believe it's just spun off as a separate company, spun off from Microsoft now. So Xiaoice is still going. Tay is the one that appeared, that was brought out in 2016. So that was brought out in America, and the interaction was over Twitter. And so probably what you know about Tay is the following. So Tay was released in March 2016, and was meant to be a kind of like fun, cool person to talk with. So this was one of the early responses in the Twitter chat. Can I just say that I'm stoked to meet you? Humans are super cool. Then the following day, not that much later, so the selling point for Tay was powered by AI will learn from interactions with you. So only a matter of hours later, chill, I'm a nice person, I just hate everybody. Some hours after that, I hate feminists and they should all die and burn in hell. And it just got worse from that point. There was there were various all caps messages about saying Donald Trump should be the president, various other sorts of ones. So this certainly caught the attention of the media. Chatbot goes crazy kind of ones, artificial intelligence out of control. It was a little bit overblown in the way that it was described in the media. So some of the responses that Tay made were actually, there was a specific trigger phrase, it turned out, which was repeat after me. People discovered that. And so a little bit like, I think it was Jarrah was saying in the chat before this, it was triggered, like being triggered by the word joke. It was triggered by repeat after me, and it would just say all of these things. But some of it was actually the bot learning. So one of the examples was apparently about Ricky Gervais. Somebody asked Tay, is Ricky Gervais an atheist? And that sent Tay off talking about Adolf Hitler and his connection with atheism and so on. So this was 2016, and there was a pretty negative kind of experience with widely deployed bots with like Tay with using AI. So I thought I'd talk a bit about what's happened, what's changed in NLP since Tay was around. But in order to talk about NLP, I just want to give you a really big picture of sort of my view of the world of machine learning and the way in which deep learning has progressively taken over there. So with a whole lot of work in machine learning, it often is in image processing that you see the initial developments. So even in the early days before there really was deep learning, when neural nets were still around, but they were all shallow, they tended to be applied to image processing kind of problems like recognizing signatures or handwritten digits on envelopes. So it was around about 2010. So there was this ImageNet contest for image classification. So there was this really big data set, and you just had to predict the class, whether a boat or a train or whatever, of the image. And so this little graph that I grabbed from this guy's blog shows, so the blue line here is the number of entries using GPUs. So it's sort of a rough proxy for how many entrants were using deep learning. They were pretty much the only systems that used GPU then. And then at the same time, the dropping in the error rate was pretty dramatic. So you saw this big increase, sort of 2012, 2014, when deep learning was really starting to take over, and it was leading to really big improvements in image processing. And so NLP was sort of feeling its way around deep learning at that time, but there wasn't anywhere near that kind of improvement. Deep learning was more of a curiosity in NLP. And so what ended up happening as a result of that increasing prevalence of deep learning in image processing was that there are these architectures each year in this ImageNet contest. There was the architecture that won, so various ones you might have heard of, like AlexNet or VGGNet or ResNet, or the ones that have followed on since then. So they're all really widely used and standard now. You'll find them in any of the deep learning kind of packages. In using Keras, there's kind of a sort of easily built in VGGNet that you can use, for example. And what they enabled was that sort of really big difference from earlier style pre-deep learning kind of machine learning, was that you could take an existing network that had been trained on a large data set and then fine tune it on your particular data set. So this whole idea of pre-training ended up being a really valuable kind of thing. So that's why lots of people now use a pre-trained VGGNet and then tweak it a little bit for their own particular task. So this architecture diagram here kind of illustrates how it works. Imagine this is a neural network on the left. So I've got a deep neural network for some particular task A, and I've got a whole bunch of hidden layers. So a thing that is characteristic of image processing neural nets that isn't necessarily in other domains is you tend to get this kind of hierarchical structure. So the lower hidden layers tend to embody low-level features like edges or really simple shapes, and it's the higher-level ones that put together those lower-level features. So you get layers that represent things like circles or eyes, or single-wheeled vehicles, or particular animal faces as you get higher. And so a thing that you can do is take this already existing network, just take some subset of the layers that you think might be useful for your particular task, plonk on another layer, and an output layer that depends on your task. You've got some set of images that you're interested in classifying that aren't the boats and trains, but it might be, is this a sunny day or a snowy day or whatever? And then you train that. And there's a lot less training because all of the lower levels have already been pre-trained from the original task on a really large data set. So that's really cool for image processing. Then the question was, how can this work for NLP? And there was a lot of sort of researchers feeling their way around trying out various kind of things. And there are a couple of things that ended up being important in bringing together a number of elements that ended up being brought together in order to do the equivalent thing in NLP to this pre-training and fine-tuning that we saw in image processing. So one of the big developments in NLP was on word embeddings. So previously, if you were using support vector machines or logistic regression or whatever, you typically use this one hot encoding for words. So you have a vector that was the length of the entire vocabulary, and you just have ones and zeros or maybe counts of words as your representation. And a really big significant development in deep learning was having these representations called word embeddings, which had really nice properties as well. So a kind of famous early one that you might have heard of, word2vec, the famous example that they used in that paper. It was found that the representation for the word king, if you subtracted the vector for the word man, added the vector, the word embedding for the word woman, and the closest one in that space was the word queen. So you got this semantic relationship out of these representations for words. And the same thing held true for morphological variation and countries and their capitals and things like that. So that was one really big development early on in the use of deep learning in NLP. Another one was the development of particular kinds of architectures that were specific to NLP. So in image processing, convolutional neural networks were the standard kind of ones that just worked really well. And the more complex architectures that won the competitions were just like sort of fancier CNNs. And that kind of CNNs actually worked okay in NLP for classification problems. But it was only when this new kind of architecture, the transformer, came along in 2017, that changed a whole lot of things. And this architecture is really quite different from existing, from the sort of ones that we saw in image processing. This transformer appears in lots of different things. So when Dennis was mentioning GPT-3, which a number of you might have seen, having come out earlier this year, the T stands for transformer. So a whole lot of models in NLP now are based on this transformer. So taking those two things together, one of the really big changes has been that they've enabled this pre-training and then fine-tuning in NLP for various NLP kind of tasks. So the idea is, in the same way that with image processing, you'd pre-train on this really massive ImageNet dataset and then fine-tune on your specific dataset for your particular domain. So there was a whole lot of initial training done on, say, Wikipedia, so one particular model that uses a transformer is called BERT. Probably the most famous one, but there are a number of others that are like that. It's the same sort. GPT-3 is one of those sort of models as well. It's also based on the transformer. So it was trained in this semi-supervised way on a massive amount of data with a really simple task, which was try to block out a word and then try to repredict what word is in there. And that gives a whole lot of pre-trained representations that you can use for words. So a bit like Word2Vec, but they vary with context, so they're a lot richer. And then you can plug on top, in the same way as the transfer learning in image processing, you can plug a classifier on top for any kind of task. So you can plug, if you're doing spam detection, then you just have a 2-class classifier that you plug on top of BERT. And it turns out when BERT was presented, just a really basic version of BERT with a really basic kind of machine learning architecture on top actually ended up getting state-of-the-art results on this benchmark suite of tasks. Things like sentiment analysis and question answering and so on. But it's not only sort of simple classification that you can use representations like BERT for. You can use it for sequence-to-sequence models as well. So, for example, if you're doing machine translation and your input is je suis étudiant, then you can build an encoded decoder kind of model built on a transformer. So the output is I'm a student. So one of the reasons I'm talking about NLP generally rather than NLU and NLG is that there's certain blurring. They used to be fairly distinct sets of techniques used for the two kinds of areas, but it's becoming kind of a single approach that you typically take to both of them now. So that's my whirlwind tour of NLP and what's been happening in that. So that brings me to BlenderBot that I mentioned. So it's probably a little hard to read, so I'll just read out a little bit of the dialogue. This comes from a paper that came out this year that's appeared on the archive repository, and they've got a bunch of examples. The paper's called Recipes for Building an Open Domain Chatbot. And yeah, they've got a whole lot of examples of things that work and things that don't. And we're going to tell you a bit about both of those. So in the first dialogue here, you've got the crowd worker saying hi. So they gathered data from Mechanical Turk, I think, crowd workers in that. The crowd worker says hi. The bot says, what kind of music do you like? I like all kinds of music, but country is my favorite. I enjoy hard rock, says the crowd worker. That's cool. Do you have a favorite band? Mine's Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin's my favorites too, also Pink Floyd. So it goes on like that. Some of it's clearly just chat, but there's some sort of information exchange kind of aspects to it as well. Ever watched it with Wizard of Oz? No, I haven't. Is it good? I know it was made in 1939. So the bot's gone away and looked up the information that Wizard of Oz came out in 1939. And the other dialogue here is kind of similar, but it's about like hobbies. So this was the sample dialogue in the paper. This was me testing it out. So there's a Blender demo, which the link's in there, so you can test it out too. So the first one, it said to me, good morning, how are you? I hope you're having a good day so far. What are you up to? I said, reading some papers about how you were constructed. And said, oh, that sounds interesting. What kind of papers are they? Are you a professor? Said, lots of maths and deep learning. Yes, I am in fact a professor. Wow, that is impressive. I bet you have lots of interesting things to share with your students. The second one, I also wanted to test out the sort of information extraction aspect of it. We're talking about favorite Netflix shows. The bot likes The Office. I said I was watching Legend of Korra. Do you know when it came out? So I don't, but I do know that it's based on the Avatar, The Last Airbender series. So it knows some stuff. So what's the architecture that it uses for this? So as I said, the reason it's called BlenderBot is it tries to bring together a number of different types of functions that bots or virtual assistants have. So in particular, there are three kinds of components that BlenderBot's really interested in, or the designers of BlenderBot are interested in. So one is the persona, so having somebody like a persona that you would want to chat with. And there's a pretty big existing data set, Conv-AI2 data set that was developed specifically for learning this kind of aspect of bots. Knowledge, that's based on an existing Wizard of Wikipedia task. Can you successfully extract information from Wikipedia? And empathy, this one's triggered largely by the experience of Tay, trying to produce a bot that's nice and doesn't end up insulting people or doing anything that would get a human banned. So they're the three core components that BlenderBot tries to learn to do well. The kind of methods that it uses to generate its dialogue are all based on the transformer architecture, which I mentioned. There's a retrieve option. So basically it's got an enormous database and it tries to retrieve the best kind of answer from that. There's a generate one where this is what would traditionally be natural language generation, but it's all part of this sequence to sequence architecture that you can train end to end as a single neural network. So this is one where it's sort of just generated from scratch. And then there's a retrieve and refine. So you try to get the closest answer and then tweak it a bit to make it the right one for a particular response. And to do the training, there are three kinds of training that BlenderBot uses. So one is the sort of fine tuning that I was talking about. So before I was talking about, all right, you've got BERT and you can just plug something on top of it for your particular task and fine tune BERT to work to solve your particular task. So there's some fine tuning that's done on top of a pre-trained network here, which I'll talk about on the next slide. The second one is a kind of multitask training. So here there are three things that you want: the persona, knowledge, and empathy. So that you can think of those as three separate tasks, and you want the bot to do well at all of those. And the last one is two-stage. So that's a kind of architecture where you can have existing systems for solving the persona aspect, knowledge, and empathy. So they could be your own systems, and you just want to combine them together. So have a higher level thing combining them together. So how does the pre-training work for this? So there's a really big data set that was scraped from Reddit with 1.5 billion training examples. And what the bot learns from that is sort of the structure of turn taking in dialogue, and also the kinds of things people might say in response. So this one's an example here. Airplane, what is it? Airplane, the movie. It's an amazing parody of plane movies, etc. To do the fine tuning, Facebook put together this data set which where they got humans to produce this. And they went through and annotated it with what kind of component each response is relevant to. So it's a bit detailed. I want to go into the details of how exactly they set up the dialogue, but some of the aspects are specifically for asking for or giving knowledge. Some are to do with personal situation. Some are to do with sort of other persona-based aspects, and other ones are like for empathy. So the bot's learning not to be horrible. So that's a whirlwind overview of how the architecture looks and how the training works. For the evaluation, so as you all know, as you heard just previously, evaluation is really hard, and there's lots of discussion in the research community about good ways of doing evaluation. Two that I wanted to highlight for this are both human evaluations that they talk about in the BlenderBot papers. I mean, one paper is just about how to do the right kind of evaluation. So one evaluation they did was using humans, a Likert scale evaluation. So you give people an option of scoring 1 to 5, like reviews that you do on rating sites. So the scores that they gave were kind of like okay-ish. What they wanted to demonstrate in this, though, was that it's generally better if you use the blender bot approach than if you use the individual components. So you can do better overall for all of the components than if you than even focusing on one does for that particular aspect. Another evaluation that they did was a pairwise human evaluation of engagingness. So I looked at a number of aspects, but I just put up engagingness here. And so in this, humans were given 2 conversations and said, which conversation would you prefer to be part of? And so this kind of evaluation was the one that Facebook designed and used to say, look, our bot is better than Mina, which is the Google one. And under that one, the Google one, people preferred the bot's conversation 28% of the time and the human one 72% of the time. And then Facebook talked a lot about their various variants of blender bots. And they actually did pretty okay. So the best results are down the bottom here. For their very best model with respect to people, then there was only a preference for humans 51% of the time versus the bot 49% of the time. So this is only in terms of engagingness rather than, other kinds of properties. So of course, there are going to be failure cases. And so in the paper, they illustrated them like 4 of the particular kinds that they thought were worth a lot of people looking at in the future. So one of the things you get with neural nets is this kind of repetition. You've got here the human saying, I like rap. It's probably not good for fishing. The bot says, I listen to rap when I go fishing too. What kind of rap do you listen to? Really, I'm from the South, so I like trap music. I'm from the South too. I live in Louisiana. What part of the South are you from? What they actually meant by repetition here isn't actually not the normal, usual meaning of repetition in neural nets, where you might get repeated words or repetition of saying exactly the same thing. Here it's more just agreeing with the bot all the time. I mean, with the human. That happens a lot with these kind of bots. Another one, driving is fun. I like to listen to music while I drive. What do you listen to? I listen to hip hop tracks, like 50 Cent. You have a hip hop fave? I don't have a hip hop favorite, but I do have a country favorite. Do you have a favorite? So that wants to illustrate forgetfulness. And relatedly, there's contradiction. So here when the bot's saying, I'm from the Midwest, and then it says, I was born in Georgia, which is not in the Midwest. And the last one is a really characteristic kind of neural net error of hallucination. So it imagines facts. So here it says, I'll have to check it out. Are there any indie survival games that you like? Then the bot says, have you ever played The Forest? It's made by the same people who made The Long Dark. So apparently they're both indie survival games, but not actually made by the same people. So it can make mistakes like that. So I think it's time for me to wrap up. My summary of this really quick overview. So my view of NLP as a whole field is that it's developed a real lot in the last few years. So since BERT, a couple of its predecessors like UML Fit, some of its successors, they've made for really dramatic changes to the way that people tackle NLP tasks and how successful they are. As I mentioned earlier, this kind of end-to-end training that you get with neural networks lets you combine the understanding and the generation into a single model. So they're really becoming a lot more related to each other in terms of techniques than they used to be. And now it's really easy to build end-to-end systems starting from pre-trained models, even in NLP. About BlenderBot specifically, it does feel like real progress that there is now this open access code and pre-trained models that you can use. And so that's here. So I'm not actually, I should have said up front, not actually affiliated with Facebook in any way. I'm not trying to sell it to you or anything, but it was just kind of fun to play with. It can produce some good quality dialogue. You can try it for yourself and see what you think. I'm not yet clear, so I haven't actually tried it out for myself, but I might get one of my students to try it out to see how well it ports to other domains. So if you want to do further fine tuning for your particular application, I don't know how well that works yet, or any feel for anything like how much data you'd need to do that successfully. So that's a bit of an open question. I had a bit of a Google around to see if anybody was reporting their own experience about that, but I didn't come across anything on that. And as I noted, there's some clear failure cases, some of which are typical of neural nets in general, and some of which seem to be like specific to this BlenderBot kind of application. So yes, that's it. I'll leave the failure cases up so you can look at them. So I think I'm supposed to stop talking now, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that. I was just curating some of the questions that had come through. I find it very interesting that you mentioned earlier that the repetition scenario, the example you had where the bot tends to agree, I would have imagined that if the bot was trained on Reddit comments, I'd imagine everyone would be against what the original poster was saying in that instance. So I'm a little bit surprised that repetition actually crops up as an issue.
Yes. So there are some details of the training, A, that I skimmed over, and B, that I don't know fully the details of. So normally there's this likelihood training. You look to see what kind of responses there are, and you train the bot to raise its own likelihood of making those or similar responses. But in this, they've introduced this thing called unlikelihood training. So there's specific behaviors that it's trying to avoid. So I'm not sure if it's agreeing because unlikelihood training was used here.
Right. There's so much detail in this, and from listening to this, I feel like the bots that I often see are fairly scripted, and to date, the ones in production are fairly scripted, fairly fixed in their conversation. But I can see this sort of stretching the capability to go towards more conversational experiences where there's more chit chat, and some people argue that chit chat doesn't have a functional use in getting outcomes from getting the job done. But I do remember something that Professor Robert Dale taught me as well when I was in university was sometimes people don't like talking to bots because you can't flirt with bots to get an outcome like a discount or leniency. But I think with a conversational system soon, maybe the more chatty you are to a bot, the more that it'd be lenient in your circumstances.
Yeah, something that I'm interested in about whether this bot can do this or not is, can you retrain it to focus more on the knowledge component, the answering questions, and that specific kind of functionality, and so it focuses less on the chat kind of aspect.
Yeah,
so
be
I
more
don't know
useful.
the answer to that yet. Yeah, certainly you could retrain it from the beginning so that it put a lot more weight on that.
I certainly would love to keep tabs with how the research space is going and knowing when it comes up into reality, when we start using it in our corporate environments. But some of the questions that did come through from Hanley, he asks, in regards to components and methods, what would you say separates Blender's bot architecture from Xiao Ice today?
So it was always a bit mysterious about how Xiao Ice was built, but since that was 2016, so none of the transformer architecture that I mentioned as being really crucial to this, none of the kind of end-to-end neural network training stuff would have been mature enough to use for Xiao Ice then. So I haven't looked to see how it works now. The Wikipedia entry seems like it's written by the Microsoft PR team, very much the, oh yes, and now we have this, human level emotional quotient or whatever it says. So yeah, I don't actually know the details from the sort of 2016 earlier one when it came out. Now it might be doing something similar to this, but because it's been spun off as a separate company and they're a bit less open than Facebook are about making this available, we can't really tell.
Right. Thank you. Bora asks, what do you expect will be the big trend for larger commercial chatbot NLUs? Do you see any of these techniques that you're talking about being adopted by some of the commercial NLP platforms?
So I reckon it's possible, largely because it's free now, and so people can try it out and see whether it can do what they want. As I was saying in answer to Dennis, I think it's a really open question about whether you can retrain it to focus more on the answer questions and carry out this functionality and less about the chatting. Yeah, so I haven't seen any reports of people trying that yet, so I don't know how feasible that is.
I see. And with the errors that you talked about, I guess what are your experiences with other types of errors that you see bots doing? I know we talked earlier at the start of the session about what's your most funny or candid or most embarrassing NLP situation. What's your experience with errors made by deployed chatbots?
Yeah, I guess I've had less experience in trying those out. What I was saying about the errors that you see in BlenderBot here being typical of neural net kind of ones. So I see them in other NLP applications rather than in chatbots. So you get some really wacky translations, for example. So a translation of a football game had Germany, 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 beat Germany, 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 47-2. It's really bad. The systems like this are really bad with handling numbers and that kind of factual information if it's just strictly translation and not looking up the answer. They also have that repetition that I was met. That's kind of more typical type of repetition. So I haven't seen any of those in the chatbot doing that, but it seems quite likely to me that that could happen. And I don't know how I prevent that.
I noted that Jara made a comment and Bora as well about this maybe not being yet ready for corporates in the whole control factor. And we don't, I think corporates don't want Tay to unleash itself and start saying all sorts of commentary in that particular area. Pavel also asked a question around, do you see there is a need for a large number of developers to use this technology once it's mature enough? Or do you think it's going to be largely sort of plug and play and easy to use?
No, I don't think it's going to be plug and play and easy to use. I think all the issues that all of you have been talking about before, if you're going to be, taking, this is really just a bot that has had lots of pre-training. So it knows more about the structure of language than maybe the kind of bots that you work with at the moment. And you still need to design data to do the fine-tuning training on. So you still need a domain expert. You still need somebody who knows how to use the actual system. So I can't see it being that fundamentally different from how things are at the moment, except that you have a bot that knows about language and conversational turn taking and stuff.
So perhaps we skip over the embarrassing errors where things like past tense or present tense and plurals, errors where the NLP currently can't handle in production systems is more easily handled by platforms like the Blender bot, but we trade that off with some other risks as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
A bot that's too flirty.
Yeah. Pavel, I think you've just run the poll previously, right? For Mark's session. Did you want to talk a bit about that or the results that you saw? I didn't get to see them.
Let me share these results again. I think, guys, you mentioned you will be surprised if the repetition is the worst kind of error. But
totally surprised.
yeah. I guess maybe it's annoying people when somebody is repeating, So it's
very non-human, I think.
Yeah, maybe that's exactly right, because human can forget, can contradict, and a lot of hallucinations, but repetition is not human. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's non-human. And the second question was, when could you see yourself using an iChatbot like BlenderBot? And it looks like it's within 5 years, so they're getting closer to the horizon of using them.
Yeah, that was the answer I expected most likely for that one.
Yeah, so it's still quite a while until it's mature enough. But yeah, actually this today presentation, it's very good one, Mark, because
thank you.
I think a year ago, remember, Dennis, when we had our first event, on-site event, then we discussed that the technology itself doesn't look like changed so much during the last few years. And we discussed that it's probably the technological challenge that not allow us to really to the bots to proliferate properly and to use. But what, Mark, you described today, it's clearly there are advancements going. We might not see them that much on a user level, but definitely the technology is going and becoming more and more mature. and this GPT, this transformer piece. Yeah, so it looks like we are getting much closer to getting the real results out of.
Yeah, I think so because bots are really complex. The rolling out of the new technology into bots is a bit slower than for more straightforward applications like doing sentiment analysis. So you find a million tutorials on the web now for using BERT to do sentiment analysis, because that's a really easy thing to do. There's lots of code that's available for doing that. Even a couple of years ago, I mean, there certainly wasn't any released code like this Facebook one. And even the descriptions in papers were kind of a bit vague. So there are a couple of Google papers that I can think of where they were saying, oh, we used, this is how we gathered data for our task-oriented agent for doing movie reviews and airline booking and stuff like that. But they're pretty vague about the actual techniques and how it kind of linked to transformer models and stuff like that. So that's a really big advance that I've seen in the last couple of years, the sort of clarity with which the current models are linked to the ones that sort of transformed other tasks in NLP.
Cool. Well, we're just on time, Mark. Thank you very much for your session today and in sharing what's on the cutting edge. I personally feel like it's still a little bit cutting edge for my liking to use in production systems. But I think that like the chat group is going off talking about using it just to idly converse and consume some time. I think that's got some real good uses and some funny stories to come out of that as well. I'd like to thank again both Mark and Luke for their time today. Before we move to the panel section, if I could ask everyone to come off their hidden cameras, turn their cameras on. Pavel will be taking a screenshot of the group today. It's I guess a group shot of the community. So hopefully we can get a grid view up with quite a few participants. And Pavel, you tell us when you want us to smile.
Yeah, you have to smile during all sessions, guys. Yeah, still need a bit 5-10 more videos. So
yep, they're just all coming online now. Yeah.
Yeah.
People combing their hair, turning lights on.
Yeah, everybody can actually take a picture. Okay, guys, everybody should take a picture. There is no need to.
How do you make it go into panel mode?
There is a gallery.
Oh, gallery.
View.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Everyone smile.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We good, Pavel?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to the panel event now. Peter Nan will be asking questions that come through.
I think I just clicked the recording pause button. Sorry, Pavel. Sorry, go on, Dennis.
That's right.
Peter will be moderating, and if you have any questions for all of us here today, or you want to just hop off the mic and hop on the mic and say a few words and just banter around, do so. This is open question time. Over to Peter.
Yeah, I should introduce our 2 new attendees, right? Or our 1.
2. Well, do both.
Cool. Okay, so Dominic is from Cognigy. So Bor and I work with Dominic. He's over in Germany, so he's come all the way from Germany tonight to the Sydney Chatbot Meetup, virtually, so it was fairly easy. So I can tell you a little bit about Dominic. So Dominic's the head of our artificial intelligence in Cognigy. He's worked on machine learning and natural language understanding for conversational automation. He's been an early stage employee and AI ML data science leader now in his third Gartner Cool Vendor enterprise. So he's been working on the front line of AI and data problems from conversational AI, recommender systems, and to geospatial intelligence, hand in hand with clients ranging from the likes of NASA to leading enterprises. So Dominic has really been around and he's got some deep knowledge in this space as well. So welcome him to the panel.
Hi.
Cool. And so you're on there, Dominic, just checking your audio. That's great.
Excellent.
All right. Cool. Okay, and everyone else has been introduced. Maybe I should introduce myself. So I'm Peter Nan. Some of you probably know me. I have a background in voice design over the years. even going back to last century, I like to say, which sounds really old, but so I've been working in voice solutions since the mid to late 1990s. More recently on chatbots, and now I work in Cognigy, helping our customers locally to get going with chatbot and voice conversation solutions. Cool, that's me. So, all right, we have a few questions coming in. I might start with one of the most basic ones. This came through in the chat and we haven't covered it. We have covered it in bits and pieces, but there was a question around Luke's time when he was talking, just on guidelines for multiple people working to train chatbots. I can feel where that question's coming from. That I've worked with teams before with trainers, and there's often a consistency in what they do or don't put into the training set. So, are there any guidelines anyone on the panel or the presenters could lay out for us, or are there any resources online that we could go to get that sort of information as well?
My first comment in that area, and I think Luke alluded to it, around the continual improvement process. I think regardless of what platform you pick and you're using, I think it's important to understand your end game from an operational standpoint. A really good point that Luke made. If you understand and plan that process for continual improvement, that kind of tells you what are the things you need to do to make it happen. And so some of the tools when you go out to procure or go to tender, some platforms will have workflows built into them, very much like approval systems, workflows to say, divvy up the work, who updates which NLP, so there's no clashing. It's almost like a CMS system for websites, but for NLP. And so there's varying levels on which, depending which platforms you choose. The Microsofts are more developer driven. Some other platforms will let you, like Creative Virtuals, will have a sort of workflow to approve and farm off work. So if you understand your organization's processes, then selecting the right tool or augmenting that with manual processes works pretty well.
Right. Thanks. Anyone else on the panel?
So my top tip would be to come together and draft some design guideline document. Could be just a wiki page in your local Jira, or some kind of written document. How milestones, and importantly, how do you solve these challenges that will come up during the design problem? So what are the sort of design decisions you foresee, and that in the beginning of the project will be something you will come back time and time again.
Yeah, so having some guidelines written down so people aren't just going off memory or their own interpretation, but having it written down. I would agree with that too, because we've had this discussion before too, Dominic, haven't we? That the most important thing is probably consistency. You want to get people can do the training, what they put in the training a little bit differently, but you really want consistency across your intents. So having it written down sounds like a great idea.
And you can have an overlapping set where you might have two people who would label or assign examples to intents, and then you can compare how people do things either the same or differently. And then you can establish guidelines to get that consistency, and you might then start reducing the amount that you overlap and still get that consistency going forward.
Great, thank you, Luke. Right, just having a check for any other questions we had through the presentations there that we've missed. Oh, there was one just recently. So what's the general feeling on bots emulating humans rather than just being presented as bots? I think I have an answer for this, but I'll definitely go out to the panel. Because, I mean, the ones that Mark has presented tonight were getting pretty close to being able to present as humans. Is that something we want, or do we still need to let people know that they're bots?
Well, I think you still want to let people know that they're bots, but that depending on the context, people can still appreciate that kind of human-like interaction, knowing that it's a bot. So I have two kids who are 14 and 11, who just really like playing with Siri and asking questions. So sometimes, for functional purposes, but others are just, trying to trick Siri or have some kind of, tell a joke kind of conversation. So if you're ringing up a bank and you want to, sort out your banking details, probably less scope for telling jokes. But some human-like interaction, I think, can still fit in there, even making it clear that it's a bot.
Yep. And therein lies the difficulty, right? Of like, what value do you put on that? It is great that the bot can look like a human, but the bean counters in an organization, how much value will they put on the necessity of, including that in the solution, I guess.
I actually think it's that chattiness nature, the conversational nature should be tied to personalization. A lot of the conversations I have to date with consulting in this space is a lot of companies want to move to personalized experience, not just know that you want to transfer money or, get a new credit card, etc., but to personalize the experience. And if you want to personalize it rather than, when you know the history of what the user's done recently, how frequently they do certain tasks. So things we were looking at in the transport space, like perhaps getting access to calendars, being able to say, look, to get to your event on time, you need to leave now. By the way, there's traffic holding up this particular area. There's been an accident, so here's an alternate trip plan. All those kinds of activities that do sort of proactiveness and personalization, I think, is where conversations will head. And I think that's when the conversational nature will be coupled with that personalization aspect. I think it'll be very soon.
Yeah, good. And that's a double whammy, isn't it? That it's highly conversational, but it's also highly useful. So yeah, if you're getting that both in one interaction, then what user wouldn't love it, I suppose. Okay, are there any other questions from the crowd? I'll just check that if anyone out there has anything they'd want to ask, now would be a good time. Otherwise, we will go with some we've got prepared. Someone just asked a tricky one from Hanley. Is there any research at the moment on ensuring NLG can produce legally compliant texts or adhere to the compliance standards in the source texts?
Well, I think at the moment we're just at basic human common sense compliance. That's already a huge achievement. So legal compliance, I haven't seen any paper, but definitely possibly even easier problem to solve as compared to, repetition problems and everything we've seen before. Because maybe with legal guidelines and language, you can adhere to very formal structures and get a better grasp on the problem. But I'm not aware of any papers, but definitely interesting problem. Maybe Mark, do you know any research in this regard?
Sorry, I was actually just looking at the link that Amy put up there. It's like, oh, that looks really interesting. So I missed what you were just saying there. Could you repeat?
Well, if there's the question was if there's any natural language generation that can produce legally compliant text. And I was thinking, actually, well, it's probably hard to just produce common sense compliant text. But then again, because of the structure and formalism in legal language, maybe it might be just an interesting problem to get a grasp on it.
I think that's something that neural net approaches are just going to be innately bad at. With legal language, where you want to be really precise and not have variation. I mean, you consciously want to have no variation because it can mean something different. So having even template-based approaches, I think, would be a much better solution than anything current. Even legal language.
Even 99% isn't good enough, like in a legal scenario, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. So another one out for the panel. And again, anyone can answer this who's got a good interest in the topic. If there's one thing you wish people would know about NLP when they're embarking on a new project, like a misconception, for example, what would you say that should be that you'd like them to know?
Just one. It's so hard to distill into one point.
I think
if you have two or three, that's all right too.
I think maybe I just want people to act human when they're talking to virtual agents. And for a while, a few years ago, this was a real challenge. We actually, because of Google in the early days and stuff, we interacted with computers in a completely different way, and we're only just starting to relearn how to interact with computers and machines again. So because of Siri and Google Home and things like that, we're asking questions in natural language again. And so that's actually really helping. But when people just, ask a key word and expect it to understand immediately what you're thinking, that's a real challenge. So act natural is what I would hope for.
Cool. Yep.
I'll say adequate resources, whether they be skilled or trained in NLP or someone you're training up, giving it sufficient attention over time, because you won't get it right the first time around. You want to make sure that you keep your models up to date and learning on the fly. Companies introduce new products, new services, kill old ones. So it's a misconception to say, oh, look, I've got all this training data that goes back, 10 years or 8 years, 5 years, because most of that's going to be out of date in the way that people speak to your business about the products and services you offer. So keep it live, keep the data live.
And I think I typed that in the chat earlier on that Luke made that point. And I thought that was an excellent point, that organizations love to see things as project-based. So, we build it, we deliver it, we celebrate, we're done. That is definitely not a chatbot project. I think they really have a life of their own, and they need that maintenance and change and improvement. And I think we're also in a space where the technology is moving so fast that, if you built something now, probably 2 years from now, you could build it differently or better. So you need to keep on top of the technology and, keep advancing it for the betterment of everyone. Does anyone else want to chime in there? Did we get a word from everybody? Okay, I have another one. So anyone who's done any work in NLU would have probably come across the problem of intent bloat, where you just get more and more of them, and then you start getting overlap, you start getting challenges in getting the right intent recognized. And different platforms have different ways of solving that. Does anyone have any any recommendations on how is that problem solved? As we want to scale out these bots to understand more things from people, how can we minimize that problem for ourselves going forward so that our bots do the right thing?
This scale problem with overlap and so on is something your project. So you start out all nice and swell, but then as you add complexity, so things explode. That's why I recommend to really start early on with the design of your bot. Try to be as comprehensive as possible and capture these problems beforehand. So a clash of two intents, you have movie tickets and support tickets if you're maybe a cinema distributor. And how do you solve these, anticipate these problems beforehand? So the first thing I think is to make sure that you capture them as they arise, so continuously test. And yeah, this is what Luke alluded to, always be very close to the user. So at the very beginning, I recommend to seed all of your intents, give it at least 5 example sentences each, and be as comprehensive as possible so that you don't miss the 10, 15, 20, 30 other intents you want to add in stage 2 of your project. And then as you continually test into some sort of cross-validation system, yeah, you can do it yourself, like continuously maintain a good test set or cross-validation logic so you know about the performance of your bot. And then, for example, the best or the most common issue is often clash, right, of intents. And my best recommendation as a strategy is to separate the overlapping examples, the overlapping class. So for example, a question like, where is my ticket? Which could be completely ambiguous if you have 2 intents. This should go into just the ticket class. And then you could, for example, then disambiguate further this class in some sort of hierarchy and say, okay, this is now a movie ticket or a support ticket based on the context, or if you have a more complex query where the user actually mentions the required information, then you'll be able to disambiguate those. And as you then continuously train with your users and have this sort of feedback cycle going throughout your deployment with semi-supervised learning, intent trainer tools.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm not sure we kind of heard mentioned tonight too much, but we kind of talked about testing, but just observing what's going on in platforms and keeping an eye on, which intents are doing well, keeping counts of ones that are wrong. Yeah, having a tool set like that, I think, is valuable. Cool.
I'd say, Luke kind of touched upon this earlier, but the matching, you take an example of like a banking environment where you're talking about balances. Maybe you've got an internal for HR as well. So we've got the challenge with most implementations, if you don't set out a roadmap early on, is that you start with one use case and you say, let's test the bot, see if bots works. Can it save money in one use case? And you build it out. And then you say that every phrase that we do have, any training data we have, whether it's orchestrated, made up, bootstrapped, or from real users, it links only to a single intent or a single topic. And as you build this out, you start to have this issue of overlap, because like a balance might relate to a card, or balance owing, or balance of your account that's in positive. Or if you're doing HR functions, what's your leave balance? What type of leave? So there's a whole bunch of disambiguations you have to make, but you don't experience that till you grow past your first, second, third use case, that you realize, oh crap, our entire organization, which is multiple business units, etc., has huge amounts of overlap all over the place. And what Dominic talks about is absolutely right, that you probably should move those confusable topics or phrases into a separate intent to then disambiguate. Did you mean balance of your credit card or balance of your leave, if that's what your bot does? But for me, I think the key way to describe what the issue is that most people, when they try and associate phrases and utterances with a bucket or an intent, they do it on a minimal match, almost like keyword searching. So they might say that I'm building a balance for my account balance, a chatbot function. And so anything balance related, the word balance, so long as it's heard or seen, balance means account balance. But really, you're yet to realize that balance might mean leave balance. And so our approach is typically to look at the maximal match. What's the most information you need to have that guarantees you that this is the topic that's being spoken about? And a lot of that comes down to micro tagging. So rather than some of the NLP platforms out there, like from Google and Microsoft and IBM, that do categorizations, they often say, give me an entire sentence, and then I'll link that sentence to a single topic. In doing that, you have no control of the performance, and you end up playing whack-a-mole, as I said before. So, find a tool set that helps you micro tag, that goes down to the very detailed level, so that you can observe your overlaps before they occur in the tool set.
Cool. Thank you, Dennis. Pavel's just put an interesting poll up there. I don't know if anyone wants to ask for clarification, but we've listed NLU engines, and the biggest response is other. I'm interested to know what's in other. Don't know if everyone could write that in the chat or something, but very interesting. I've got one curly question now. This is following on from earlier. So this is a night about NLP. And there was an interesting question that Pavel asked earlier in the polls about, what was the most important thing for a chatbot project, and strategy came out on top and technology came out at the bottom. I'm going to ask an interesting question though, and I'll go through each panelist. On the technology angle, is NLP the most important thing in a chatbot project for the technology? And if not, what would you say is? I might start with you, Luke. We haven't heard from you for a while.
Peter, was the question, what technology is the most important?
From the technology angle, is NLP, the most important thing? And if not, like what else is really key to getting a successful project out the door?
Sure. I think that a few years ago, the answer to most questions was, do you want to go with IBM Watson, Google Dialogflow, or Microsoft Lewis? And it kind of helped if you were already on Google Cloud or Azure or something like that. But now the landscape is shifting so much that there are just lots and lots of virtual agent platforms. And the tricky thing is they all do very different things. And some have lots of strength in conversation design and build. Some have lots of strength in integrations and connectors. Some are strong with content management and improvement. So really you need to understand what's out there, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and see what aligns best to your own requirements. And that's a lot of work to do. And I think it needs to be done up front and as early as possible, along with your strategy, because it really lays the foundation for your architecture and how well your solution will be technically.
Okay, so knowing what you want and knowing what's out there in the market space, I guess. Cool. Who else have we got? Dennis. Oh, I think you're on mute, Dennis.
Could you repeat the question? I was taking a few notes.
Okay, sorry. So it was from the technology angle with the chatbot project. Is NLP the most important thing at getting a successful project out there, or are there other layers that might actually be more important?
I feel like NLP can be largely a solved problem, although it can be frustrating with playing whack-a-mole and embarrassing situations. So I think if you're more mature, the more technical challenge is around context management, switching of conversations from one topic to another, and then the aspect of personalization. So how do you roll in other pieces of data that might say that this person's called us or talked to us, 5 times in the last week, and their topic has always been about ordering pizza. So instead of asking what they want for dinner tonight, we should be saying, would you like pizza again tonight? And that changes your entire dialogue flow management and implementation. That experience will change. And so it's really finding a platform that can merge personalization, history, and topics that have been spoken about with the experience you want for the customer. So we try to use a thing called the next best action framework here at Pure Speech Technology. So we then tie in actions of what has been requested through intents, and when we link that together with data that shows us the history of what's been happened or context of where they are physically or what the time of day as well. So those are the elements from a personalization aspect.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, and they can be hard to get right. Dominic? Oh, is he frozen? Or is he just sitting very still?
Answer, in a scientific manner, as we've seen in the presentation, where you have the NLP benchmark. For an enterprise, though, there's no constant fixed variable, benchmarks that we can improve on and we can pick. This is the best technology. They have NLU benchmark performance. Wow, this will save us X time, but does it? It's the whole package. That's why I think the platform idea is very important. But Dennis alluded to with content management, this sort of thing. So I would very much look at your own needs, use case. What are you actually trying to accomplish? What are you probably making the biggest impact for your business with that chatbot process? And that can also then guide the answer to the question, what is the biggest and most important technology? Whether it's bringing the people, teams, the content on board, saving a lot of time, of course, with superior NLP technology, making it ever more natural. But yeah, is that the single most important thing for your users? Very much depends on your business and what you want to achieve here.
Yep. So similar answer to Luke, yeah. Yes, there's many variables. So even though it was all about NLU tonight, there's certainly other big things involved in getting a chatbot project out the door. How's our time going, folks? Oh, we're right on time.
Yeah, we are right at time. That's interesting poll results in the chatbots area as well.
I was just looking. Someone did mention RASA, and
yeah. Clearly, there is no leader, right? So that space is still developing. So yeah, it's kind of the winner here is other. So...
the winner is other. Yep.
We need a secondary poll where we can put free text in.
Yeah, the Zoom is not allowing, I think, to do free text. Otherwise, I would definitely do it. But probably we can do it through the chat and then go deeper. But clearly, right? So it means that most of the people actually using the different language, or Cognigy, or like pure speech one, or I heard about many others. I think a few meetups ago, Haptic Guys was there as well. So there's kind of a lot of interesting solutions out there. So yeah, it's compared to the RPE market, which is now have like a clear leaders, it looks like here is still maybe a few years away from that area, and it's area up for grabs, I think, for the companies who is aspiring to get good results and build amazing engines.
The final comment, I think Jara's asked the question around with the rapid world changing so quickly. How do you I guess protect yourself from being from platforms that will disappear? I think own the data. That is, own all the training data, own all the utterances, and the categorizations. The tools will all mature in terms of building more frameworks in and approvals processed of what's being added. I think it's important to own the data, but also own the intents as well. So the grouping and the categorizations, whether you export that out to an Excel spreadsheet on a monthly basis or something, own that data so that you can then say that if you need to lift and shift, it should be a case of just taking your Excel spreadsheet and moving to a new platform. Obviously, some platforms need different volumes of data, but if you've got the full set of all that training information, all the real life data, then you can move platforms much more easily as well.
This is something that I have no experience with working on a project like that, so I don't know whether it's feasible. But I mean, clearly you're going to choose one technology and go with the implementation with that. But I guess it's also valuable to know how portable the way that you set up your data and your intents and everything are. So having like a secondary, hey, let's try it out on this other platform, just as a quick and dirty, see how portable this is. Might be useful for trying to preserve your data in a format that can actually be transferred, if everything falls apart.
Okay, guys, so I think this will be the end of the official part where we just switching off the recording, and we still typically leave like 10 or 15 minutes for having some questions that probably somebody don't want to share openly, or maybe a bit deeper discussion. So for those who will be listening to this video, thank you very much, guys, and I'm switching off.